I was reborn in a coffin, my face still bearing the corpse spots of a poisonous death. Chapter 1. My stepmother wailed in the funeral hall, her voice breaking with grief. My son, how could you be so heartless as to abandon your mother? My younger half-sister clutched the list of my dowry, weeping as though she had lost her own mother. The man who had killed me in my previous life was now feigning sorrow, urging my father to grieve. I pushed open the coffin lid and sat up, the corpse spots looking especially grotesque in the candlelight. Stepmother, did the lipstick you fed me taste good? All the guests were terrified, but only the ghost of the wrongfully killed maid Shuangwen drifted over to me. Miss, the wrongfully deceased souls in the mansion all wish to serve you. Later, my stepmother bribed a Taoist priest to defile me and bring me back to life through a corpse. I smiled and asked my ancestors. Ancestors, is he saying I'm an evil spirit? All the portraits of my ancestors in the ancestral hall suddenly opened their eyes. The oldest ancestor pointed at the Taoist priest and shouted, "Nonsense! The phoenix of the Shin family. How dare you slander her?" In the end, I became the first female marquis of the dynasty. My stepmother knelt by the well where I died from poison, apologizing day and night. My younger sister was taken to a farm on my birthday and never allowed to return to the capital. That was my previous life. The day they killed me, the scraping sound of my nails against the coffin walls was the first sound I heard upon being reborn. Darkness, thick as solidified ink, weighed heavily on my eyelids. A strong, pungent odor of cheap pine wood and preservative herbs invaded my nostrils. Each breath tore at the depths of my throat, leaving a burning sensation that clearly etched the agonizing pain of my final moments before death. That bowl of beauty soup brought to me by my stepmother Wang, its melted rouge so loving in its redness. Consciousness floated up from the icy depths like fragments of a sinking ship. I wanted to move, but my body felt nailed to the cold wooden plank, heavy and terrifying. My face, neck, and exposed wrists felt taut, with an odd numbness and uneven texture. Rigor mortis. I assessed the situation calmly, as if reviewing a loss-making ledger. This body, recently claimed by poison and now decaying, has become the starting point for my revenge. The deliberately amplified wailing in the funeral hall pierces the thick coffin, like a dull knife slicing through my eardrums. My son, my dearest child, how could you be so heartless? Leaving your mother alone like this. It was the stepmother, Wang Shi. Her sobbing was perfectly timed, a heart-wrenching wail laced with calculated hoarseness. The trailing notes drawn out in a prolonged, pitiful lament, enough to bring tears to the eyes of any unsuspecting listener. Sister, sister, a younger, more delicate voice followed closely behind, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. You've left me. What am I supposed to do now, this huge marquise mansion? Without you as its pillar, won't it collapse? It was my younger half-sister, Shuangwen. She cried with such heartfelt emotion, more so than when her own mother died in my memory. I could almost picture her tear-streaked face, clutching a handkerchief, her shoulders trembling slightly, one hand tightly pressed against her sleeve. There, she must be holding the list of my dowry, the document that would ensure her a life of luxury and comfort for the rest of her days. A calm male voice rang out with feigned compassion. Father-in-law, please accept my condolences. Sister Zhuahua. She was so young and beautiful, yet she passed away so suddenly. It is truly a tragedy. Please take care of yourself. Old man, the Marquis needs you to support the family. Humph. It's my good fiancé, Prince Zhao Heng of the Jing'an Marquisate. In my previous life, it was he who sweet-talked me into handing over the fields and shops my mother left me, while secretly carrying on an affair with Shuangwen, and ultimately tacitly approved of the Wang family poisoning me. Now, he's playing the role of a devoted son and virtuous son-in-law to the fullest. The buzzing whispers around me, lowered in volume, carried sympathy, regret, and perhaps a hint of schadenfreude. The guests crowded the funeral hall. They had come to pay their respects, but also to witness the tragic death of the Marquis's eldest daughter. Hua, the eldest daughter of the Marquis of Dingyuan, had died of illness in such an unclear manner, becoming the latest topic of conversation for them after meals. Enough! Gathering all the strength remaining in my body, which had been corroded by poison and stained by death, and filled with rage at the absurd farce before my eyes, I pushed upward with all my might. Creak, clang. The rotting coffin lid groaned under the weight, sliding sideways with a loud crash, sending a cloud of dust into the air. The sudden flood of light stung my eyes, but I forced myself to keep them open. The flickering, pale candlelight in the funeral hall illuminated my seated figure. Dead silence. The funeral hall, which had moments ago been filled with hypocritical wailing and whispered conversations, was now replaced by a frozen stillness. The air seemed to have solidified into ice, pressing heavily on everyone's chests. All sounds ceased abruptly, as if an invisible hand had clamped down on everyone's throats. Dozens of eyes, filled with horror, stared at me as if I were a demon crawling out of hell. I could clearly see my stepmother Wang, who was closest to the coffin. Her face, meticulously made up and now smeared with tears, lost all color in an instant, leaving only a deathly pallor of sheer terror. Her mouth was wide open, maintaining the shape of a whale, but her throat could only emit a series of gasping sounds. Huh. Huh. Her eyes bulged, fixated on my face, no, on the purple-blue corpse spots on my face and neck, which looked especially grotesque and terrifying in the candlelight. Ah, ghost! Ghost! The first piercing scream erupted, like a drop of water into boiling oil, instantly igniting the funeral hall. Fear spread like a plague. The women turned pale with terror, screaming and fainting or scrambling to escape. The men were equally pale, stumbling backward and knocking over the incense altars and candlesticks behind them, causing a clatter of broken glass and offerings scattering across the floor. The entire funeral hall descended into chaos, a boiling cauldron of terror, filled with screams of panic, the sound of scrambling feet, and the clatter of crashing objects. In the midst of this utter chaos and panic, I slowly turned my stiff neck, my gaze as sharp as an icy blade, fixated on the distorted face of my stepmother, Wang Shi. My throat was dry and tight, and my voice was hoarse and low, like sandpaper scraping against rotten wood, carrying an inhuman, cold chill from the grave. Every word cut through the chaos. Second mother. I watched her pupils contract sharply as she forced a stiff, eerie smile. The box of lipstick you fed me. Did it taste good? With a loud thud, Wang Shi seemed to be struck by an invisible hammer, her body jerking violently. Her eyes rolled back, and she stumbled backward, about to collapse. At the peak of the chaos, an indescribable chill crept silently toward my side. The corner of my eye caught a faint, almost transparent shadow. It was a young maidservant dressed in a coarse, faded cotton dress, her hair tied in two pigtails. She was small and frail, her face pale and lifeless. Her figure was ethereal and unstable, as if she might be blown away by the wind at any moment. Yet her hollow eyes were unusually clear, reflecting my figure distinctly. It was Xiaolian, the maid my mother had left behind to raise me from childhood. Just 2 days before I fell ill, Wang Shi had found an excuse to accuse her of accidentally falling into the lotus pond in the back garden. When she was pulled out, her body was already bloated from the water. The mansion merely said she had a tragic fate and buried her hastily. So, she was here too. Xiaolian's transparent lips moved, but no sound audible to the living escaped them. Yet the whispers, filled with endless hatred and loyalty, echoed directly in my icy mind. Miss, it's really you. You've returned. Her voice flowed like icy stream water through my heart, tinged with sobbing. I couldn't nod, only shifting my gaze slightly toward her. Xiaolian's ghostly figure seemed to tremble with excitement. Miss, don't be afraid. In this mansion, there are others who died unjustly. The old woman Zheng who was beaten to death in the kitchen. The young servant Ah Fu who was tortured to death in the stables. And many others who were killed by the second madam and her sisters. We all saw it. We all hate them. The venomous intent was almost solidifying into frost. Just say the word, miss. A kind of almost devout fervor appeared on Xiaolian's pale face. We are all willing. We will do whatever you ask. We will keep an eye on them for you. We will dig up all the dirty and stinking secrets of this marquis's mansion and show them to you. A cold, dark current carrying countless faint resentments silently surrounded me. They came from every dark corner of the marquis's mansion, carrying different kinds of pain and hatred. But at this moment, they strangely converged into a single will: follow me and take revenge. Just as Mrs. Wang was about to collapse completely and was subconsciously supported by Shenlianer, who was equally frightened. My hoarse voice rang out again, piercing the chaos like an ice pick. What are you panicking about? I'm not dead yet. I just came back to take a look. My gaze swept over the guests in the hall, still shaken by the commotion, before settling on my father, Dingyuan Marquis Shinchong, whose face was ashen and whose eyes darted nervously between me and the others. His cloudy eyes betrayed more fear than concern. Father. My voice was lifeless yet unusually clear. My daughter died under mysterious circumstances. There are some things I must ask you in front of everyone. My icy gaze once again locked onto the face of Wangshi, who was struggling to stand steady and avoiding my eyes. I spoke slowly and deliberately. Second mother. Before I left, you brought me a bowl of porridge, saying it was made with the finest lipstick, the best for nourishing the skin. Where did you buy that lipstick? Your daughter wants to taste it again. The words vermilion were spoken with great emphasis. Wang's body trembled. The last trace of color drained from her face, and her lips trembled as she tried to say something, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted fearfully to the side of the memorial hall, where her confidant, Li Ma, was standing. Miss. Xiaolian's urgent voice rang in my head. Li Nyang. There's something in her sleeve. When Wangshi fell, she secretly slipped a small porcelain bottle into her sleeve. Wangshi didn't catch it, and it fell into her own sleeve. It's the bottle that contained the poisonous rouge. There's a mark on it that says Ningxiang Pavilion. Ningxiang Pavilion, the most renowned cosmetics shop in the capital, whose owner is a distant relative of Wangshi's maternal family. I immediately spoke up in a hoarse voice, not loud but with an unmistakable authority. Mrs. Li, please be so kind as to search the sleeve pocket on the right side of the second lady. In her panic just now, she seemed to have dropped something important into it. That thing. It looks like a small porcelain bottle. Mrs. Li's face turned as white as a corpse, and her legs began to shake uncontrollably. No. No. Old servant. She stammered incoherently. Shinchong furrowed his brows, his suspicious gaze darting between me, Wangshi, and Li Ma. The guests in the hall also sensed something amiss. Fear was temporarily replaced by overwhelming astonishment, and countless eyes fixated on Li Ma and Wangshi. Li Nyang. Shinchong barked in a deep voice, his authority as a man of high rank evident. Go. Do as the young miss says. Li Nyang was terrified out of her wits. Under Shincheng's piercing gaze and the stares of all the guests, she trembled as she moved toward Wangshi, who was pale as a ghost and nearly collapsed. Her hands trembled as she reached into Wangshi's wide sleeve pocket to search. Wangshi closed her eyes in despair, her body as limp as a pile of mud, supported only by Shenlianer, who was equally terrified. Under the gaze of everyone present, Auntie Li finally pulled out a small round blue and white porcelain bottle about an inch high from Wang's sleeve. The bottle was small and exquisite, with the bottom facing outwards. A clear seal mark was visible in the candlelight. Ningxiang Pavilion. Ningxiang Pavilion? A sharp-eyed guest whispered in shock. Isn't that the Wang family? Boom. The funeral hall erupted once more. This time, it was no longer mere fear, but a surging tide of shock, realization, and contempt. Heaven! How could the bottle from Ningxiang Pavilion, need I say more? The Wang family's maternal clan. That rouge. What did the eldest miss just say about the soup? Poisoned rouge soup? No wonder. She died so suddenly. Shin Chang's face turned from green to black, then to a furious purplish red. He stared intently at the small porcelain bottle, then looked sharply at Wang, who was lying on the ground like rotten mud, his eyes spewing out a fierce anger. No matter how confused he was, he understood most of it at this moment. The death of his beloved daughter was actually the work of his second wife. This was completely trampling on the reputation of the Marquis of Dingyuan and his dignity. Wang, sure. Shin Chong ground out the two words through clenched teeth, his voice distorted by rage. He suddenly raised his foot, ready to kick her with all his might. Father, please calm down. My hoarse voice rang out again, cold and calm, as if I were in complete control. Family matters should not be aired in public. Second mother must have been momentarily confused and is surely filled with regret. I looked at Shin Chong, whose face was covered in corpse spots, but his eyes were sharp as knives. Now that my daughter has returned, there are some accounts that must be settled. The urgent matter at hand is to send the shocked uncles, cousins, and relatives back to the mansion to calm down. As for today's events, I hope everyone will spare the Marquis a little face and be discreet. My gaze slowly swept over the guests, who were still in shock and full of curiosity. There was no pleading in my eyes, only a cold, unquestionable warning. Shin Chang's chest rose and fell violently as he forced down his raging anger. He understood what I meant. The Marquis couldn't afford to lose face. He took a deep breath and forced a smile that looked worse than crying. He bowed to the guests and said, "It is a misfortune for my family to disturb you all. Today, please return home. We will send someone to apologize in person on another day. Please leave." The guests, as if granted a pardon, knew better than to get involved in this mess. They scattered like birds, carrying with them the shocking secrets and fear they had witnessed, fleeing the funeral hall that now felt like a haunted house. The funeral hall suddenly emptied, leaving only the Shin family members and a few servants cowering on the ground. The air was filled with the scent of incense and candles, fear, and the deathly silence that followed the exposure of a conspiracy. Wangshi was being supported by two burly women, her body limp like a lifeless shell, her eyes vacant and completely defeated. Shen Lianer had already let go of her hands, huddling in the corner, trembling uncontrollably. The look in her eyes was filled with fear that seemed to penetrate to the bone. Shin Chong was gasping for breath, staring intently at Wangshi, then glancing complexly at me sitting in the coffin. His facial muscles twitched. I ignored them, slowly and stiffly attempting to move my legs out of the coffin. The body, soaked in death and forcibly pulled back, made a faint creaking sound with every movement, accompanied by a bone-chilling sensation of resistance. "Miss, be careful," Xiaolian's worried voice rang in my head. Just then, a series of hurried and disorderly footsteps came from afar, accompanied by a sharp, shrill, and somewhat deranged voice. "Demon. Evil spirit. It must be a demon reincarnated in a corpse. Marquis. Don't be fooled by this demon." A disheveled Taoist priest, dressed in a filthy robe and holding a peachwood sword and talismans, was pushed and shoved into the room by another of Wangshi's trusted servants. The Taoist priest had a sly expression and shifty eyes. As soon as he entered the room, he pointed at me, who had just stood up from the coffin. and shouted, "Great Heavenly Lord! Such heavy energy and corpse chi! Lord Marquis! Look! This woman has a dark complexion. Her corpse spots have not faded. And she is surrounded by countless vengeful spirits of the wrongfully deceased. She is definitely not your noble daughter. She is clearly an evil ghost that has crawled out of hell and borrowed the body of your precious daughter to return to the living world and wreak havoc. If she is not quickly removed, the Marquis family will suffer a catastrophic disaster, and blood will fill the sky." While shouting hoarsely, he waved a peachwood sword and threw a stack of talismanic paper at me. "Evil spirit! Quickly reveal yourself and be punished." The yellow talismans fell like withered leaves. The few people left in the spirit hall, including Shinchong, were once again gripped by the sudden turn of events and the Taoist priest's frantic accusations. Their eyes darted between me and the priest, filled with fear and suspicion. A malicious glint of hope flickered in Shenlianer's eyes once more. I stood there, not even bothering to brush away the talisman that had landed on my shoulder. The corpse spots on my skin looked even more eerie in the dim light. I looked at the clownish Taoist priest, then at the overseer behind him, who couldn't hide his smugness. Finally, my gaze slowly shifted to the heavy, intricately carved wooden door leading to the ancestral hall at the back of the funeral hall. The corners of my lips curled upward in a slow, icy smile. There was no warmth in that smile, only a cruel, almost ruthless sense of control. "Oh, an evil spirit?" My hoarse voice echoed hollowly in the empty funeral hall, carrying an odd penetrating quality. As if I were asking the void. He said I'm an evil spirit. My gaze seemed to pierce through the heavy ancestral hall door, landing on the layers of spirit tablets and portraits of ancestors hanging inside. My voice suddenly rose, carrying an odd, clear, and majestic tone like the clanging of metal, piercing through the roof and straight toward the ancestral hall, ancestors above. "Did you all hear that?" He said that the bloodline of the Shin family is an evil spirit. As the words fell, whoosh! A cold wind, seemingly out of nowhere, suddenly swept into the spirit hall. All the white curtains fluttered wildly. The candle flames flickered violently, growing dim and bright, casting everyone's shadows like dancing ghosts. Bang! The heavy, intricately carved wooden door leading to the ancestral hall seemed to be violently struck from within by an invisible giant hand, emitting a dull, thunderous crash. The door latch snapped in two. In the next instant, as everyone stood frozen in horror, their eyes wide with terror, inside the ancestral hall, the massive portraits of the successive generations of the Dingyuan Marquis and his wives, hanging on the walls, the faces that had once been solemn, dignified, or serene, came to life. The eyes that had been frozen on the canvas suddenly opened in the dim light. Pair after pair of eyes, some aged, some sharp, some serene, pierced through the canvas and the barrier of time, coldly fixating on the Taoist priest in the center of the hall with endless authority and fury. The portrait of the founding Marquis at the front, depicting the venerable ancestor of the Shin family clad in black armor and holding a long spear, exuding an air of authority without needing to raise his voice, whose lips had been tightly sealed, slowly parted. A voice, old yet resonant, filled with the brutal aura of battle, shook the entire funeral hall, causing dust to fall in a shower. It thundered like rolling thunder, exploding in everyone's ears and souls. Bullshit. The voice seemed to contain the roar of 1,000 horses, causing the Taoist priest's flabby body to tremble, and his peachwood sword clattered to the ground. The old ancestor in the portrait had his beard and hair standing on end, his eyes wide with anger, and the long spear in his hand seemed ready to burst out of the painting. He extended the massive, calloused finger from the painting, as solid as if it were real, and with the force of 1,000 pounds, he jabbed it through the air toward the Taoist priest, who was already so terrified that his soul had fled his body and he was defecating and urinating uncontrollably. "Where did you come from? You filthy scoundrel? Dare you defame the pure bloodline of the Shin family in front of our ancestral hall?" accusing us of being evil spirits? The phoenix of the Shin family has returned from the ashes. Do you think you, a lowly scum, have the right to slander us? Get out! The final get out echoed like a tangible sound wave, carrying the force of a thunderclap and a torrent of rage, crashing into the Taoist priest's chest. Pfft, the Taoist priest couldn't even utter a scream. His body flew through the air like a broken kite, violently thrown by an invisible force, crashing into the wall several zhang away before slumping to the ground, bleeding from his mouth and nose, completely unconscious. The talismans he had scattered on the ground ignited without fire, instantly turning into wisps of blue smoke that vanished into thin air. Dead silence. This silence was more complete and profound than when a coffin lid was opened, carrying a fear that froze the soul and a reverence rooted in the blood. The old woman supporting Wang Shi's legs gave way, collapsing to her knees with a thud. Shin Lianer screamed and fainted completely. The steward who had led the Taoist priest inside rolled his eyes and died of fright. Shin Chang's body trembled violently, his face no longer pale but a deathly gray. He stared at the portraits of his ancestors that had come to life in the ancestral hall, at the stern faces of his forebears with their hair standing on end and anger still lingering. Then slowly and stiffly turned toward me, standing in the center of the spirit hall, his daughter who had been resurrected from the dead, covered in corpse spots, yet now called Phoenix by her ancestors themselves. Thud. The Dingyuan Marquis, who had spent half his life in the imperial court. His legs could no longer support his weight, and he knelt straight toward me. His knees hit the cold blue bricks, producing a dull thud. He opened his mouth, his throat making a hoarse sound, but no words came out. Only his cloudy old eyes were filled with endless fear, complete submission, and a hint of an indescribable shock that originated deep within his bloodline. Inside the ancestral hall, the portraits of the ancestors who had come back to life slowly lost their divine glow, returning to the frozen dignity on the canvas. Only the old ancestor's furious tiger-like eyes seemed to retain a trace of his former arrogance, silently watching everything happening in the spirit hall. The cold wind ceased, and the candle flames stabilized once more, casting a pale light over the chaos on the ground and the kneeling figures. I slowly raised my hand, its movements still stiff and sluggish like those of a corpse, and gently brushed away the useless yellow talisman from my shoulder. The skin on my fingertips was ice cold, and purple-blue corpse spots wound their way across them in the candlelight, resembling some ancient, mysterious totem. My gaze swept over the limp, incontinent, and unconscious Wang family members, over the terrified and fainted Shin Lianer on the ground, and finally settled on my father Shin Chong, who was kneeling before me, trembling like a leaf. My voice returned to its original hoarse and low tone, but it carried the absolute power of controlling life and death. Each word like an ice pick chiseling into ice. From this day forward, Shin Zhuohua is the sole master of the Marquis of Dingyuan's mansion. Shin Chang's head dropped sharply, his forehead hitting the cold brick wall with a dull thud. There was not a shred of the dignity of a marquis left, only the submission and fear of one who had narrowly escaped death. The dust settled. 3 months later, the emperor's special envoy arrived with an imperial edict in bright yellow. Shin Zhuohua, the eldest daughter of the Dingyuan Marquis, is virtuous, graceful, and fearless in the face of danger. At a time of great upheaval in her family, she carried on the legacy of her ancestors, demonstrating great wisdom and courage, securing the ancestral temple, and stabilizing the family's reputation. She truly is a woman who can rival men in recognition of her extraordinary merits. She is hereby granted the title of Dingyuan Marquis, to be inherited by her descendants for all eternity. So ordered. This servant, Shin Zhuohua, receives the imperial edict with gratitude. My voice was calm and steady as I donned the imperial bestowed marquis's robe and accepted the imperial edict, a symbol of supreme authority. The corpse stains had long since faded, but the coldness and dignity between my eyebrows were more intimidating than any makeup. The Marquis of Dingyuan welcomed its first female owner, who was also the first female marquis in the history of our dynasty. The first order of the new marquis's mansion was clear and cruel. 1. I sat upright on the seat, symbolizing the authority of the marquis. My gaze as cold as if I were looking at a dead object. Looking down at my former stepmother, who had been tortured beyond recognition and was being held down by 2 strong maids. Since you love the taste of that well so much, go there and enjoy it. In the most remote corner of the marquis's back garden was a deep, bottomless abandoned well, its mouth covered with slippery green moss and emitting a rotten smell. It was here that in my previous life, she had pushed my body, still breathing weakly after being poisoned. Without hesitation, Wang was stripped of her luxurious clothes and left wearing only a thin prison uniform. Her hair disheveled, her eyes crazy and desperate. She was forced to kneel on the cold well rim, her knees grinding against the rough stone. The maidservant mercilessly pressed her head down toward the dark, deathly well, opening time and again. Speak! The maidservant barked harshly, carrying the new master's will. Apologize to the well. Apologize to the young miss you killed. Speak! I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Chua. Spare me. Spare me. Wang Shi wept uncontrollably, her voice rising to a shrill, inhuman wail as she pleaded with the well that had swallowed countless souls, including her own in a previous life. It was my foolishness. I deserve to die. Please spare me. Spare me. Her voice echoed off the well walls, stirring hollow and despairing reverberations. Day and night, never ceasing, that well became the gate to her eternal torment. The second command was directed at Shenlianer, who was trembling in a heap. As for you, my voice was calm. Out of consideration for our sisterhood, you will go to the harshest farmstead in the outskirts of the capital to cultivate your mind and body. Remember, you depart today. I picked up the cup of clear tea beside me, and the lid gently brushed the surface of the water, producing a crisp sound. Today is my birthday. I looked at her face, which had turned as pale as paper, and the corners of my lips curled into a cold smile. It is also the day when you, in your previous life, mixed poison into my birthday noodles. The farm will be harsh and bitter, just enough for you to constantly reminisce about this sisterly affection. Shenlianer didn't even have the strength to cry anymore and was dragged away like a pile of mud. The carriage escorting her drove away with a heavy clang as the gates of the marquis's mansion closed, heading toward a desolate and bitterly cold destination. Every birthday for the rest of her life would be overshadowed by this nightmarish day. The night was deep and silent. In the newly renovated ancestral hall, the eternal lamps burned dimly, illuminating the ancestral portraits, which had been newly framed and now appeared even more solemn and majestic. In the incense burner, the finest agarwood emitted straight plumes of blue smoke. I stood alone in the hall, having shed the imposing robes of the day, dressed only in plain white robes. My gaze slowly swept over the familiar and unfamiliar faces in the portraits, finally resting on the angry, spear-wielding figure of the founding ancestor. Deep within my cold, hard heart, something seemed to shift ever so slightly. I picked up 3 sticks of incense and lit them by the eternal lamp. The blue smoke drifted upward, blurring the stern contours of the portrait, facing the spirit tablets of my ancestors. I bowed my head slightly. There were no words, only a silent, icy pact reaffirmed in the swirling incense smoke. Turning to leave the ancestral hall, the heavy wooden doors closed silently behind me, separating me from the incense and solemnity. The cold moonlight filled the courtyard, casting my shadow long and slender. My fingertips brushed against the cold white marble railing, where once there had been traces of blood and flesh. Now smooth and pristine, it still seemed to carry the chill of hell. I raised my head slightly, gazing at the lonely, cold moon in the night sky. It seemed that only the fiercest of the living could command, the most docile of the dead,